Okay, nasa final na ho tayo, pangatlong series. Sasalang na ho natin. This is final, isasalang na ho natin. Hopefully napanood nyo yung una at saka yung pangalawa.
Now, this is some amazing video that you're seeing from CNN election night. And I want to go back and show you a little bit about this clip. First, I want to explain what's happening in this clip. What's happening in this clip is this is the live feed from Clarity Elections coming through the Associated Desk or Decision Desk HQ. So this is the live feed. You're seeing the database that Clarity has as it gets updated with votes, okay? And right now, oh, and this little ribbon at the bottom, this is generated by CNN. And they update this a second after they get the update from Clarity up here. So let's just look. Right now, Andy Beshear, who is the guy that upset Matt Bevin, the governor at the time, Andy Beshear has 673,948 votes. That ties to what the ribbon from CNN says. Same thing with Matt Bevin, 662,235. 662,235. Now, let me take you through, and real quick, I'm going to run it again. You're going to see, if you're watching just this gold, you're going to see a flash update, and then this guy's face fills the page, and then I'm going to show you what you really missed. So here we go. Watch the gold. The update's coming. Boom, there it updates, and now here's this guy. Now let me show you what you missed. We're going to drag this back frame by frame. And so here we are before the update, and now I'm going to start walking you forward. Watch the gold. Here comes the update from Clarity. Boom. There it is. So now the update, Andy Beshear has 674,508 votes. And look down below, Andy Beshear had 673,948. They haven't had a chance to update the ribbon because this is in split seconds we're looking now. So Andy Beshear has just gained 560 votes. That makes sense. That's what happens as more votes come in, right? Let's look at Matt Bevin. He now has 661,675. But look down below. He did have 662,235 at the exact same second that Andy Beshear has gone up 560 votes. Matt Bevin has gone down 560 votes. This is vote switching in the computer. And by the way, between the 560 gain and 560 loss, you have just seen 25% of the loss amount of this race happen in front of your very eyes. We saw other things. We saw, for instance, that the tabulation software itself had problems. Let me explain what I mean by that. We first went in and we did a query of the database using...
Hey, Russ?
Yeah.
Just when you were showing that video, something that happened with that. Coincidentally. Can you just repeat what you said after the 560 votes disappeared?
Yeah, you want me to go back there and show you that?
Well, we got through that, but then you started to say this is voter fraud and you went down.
What you have just seen is 560 votes added to Andy Beshear at the exact same second that 560 votes have been taken away from Matt Bevin. This is vote switching going on inside the computer. And that's 1,120 votes, which is about 25% of the entire loss margin you just saw happen before your eyes on election night from the Clarity Elections database. We also saw problems in the tabulation software. For instance, we have a query here that says we would like to see from the database all just the straight party ticket votes, and we would like to see them right here for the governor's race. And I started looking down and I saw precinct C148 and I saw undervotes. And I went, wow, that's kind of weird. How do you get an undervote if you pull the straight party ticket? Well, it turns out in Kentucky you can. But I didn't know that at the time. So I started looking and I mean, I spent hours looking at this. And eventually I went back and I reran the query, or I attempted to rerun the query, just to make sure that I hadn't gotten it wrong. But when I reran the query, I changed the order. Now, it shouldn't matter whether you ask for straight party tickets and the governor's race. It shouldn't matter if you ask for the governor's race and you then refine it by straight party ticket. But it did matter in this case. Same precinct, same number of votes cast, but all the undervotes have gone away. There are no undervotes now. All the undervotes have been awarded to Andy Beshear, and 20% of the Republican votes have been awarded to Andy Beshear. The tabulation software itself, if you know the right order, you can determine who wins. Now, for those of you who may not understand what an undervote is where you start voting down the ballot and you get to, say, the fourth or fifth race, and you just don't know either person and you don't want to vote it at all, and you skip that race. Well, that creates an undervote. It creates a blank space. And so, obviously, in the first one, 8 people skipped the race, but when you ask the query differently, it gives you those 8 votes to the Democrat. This is a problem. So, what are we doing and finding using cyber here in Dallas? Well, there's a group, Open Records here, that's doing a fabulous job, and they have been downloading the files of the cast votes in both Dallas and Harris County every single day and archiving. And they built a unique database. What they do is they assign to a voter record a self-identifying unique identifier. And by that I mean they look across the entire voter record of that cast vote and they add up all the zeros and ones, and it gives you a unique identifier that's different from any other vote. So now we can actually flag it. And we can see if that identifier changes, we know that that vote has been tampered with. In the course of that, we've seen phantom, we've seen ghosts, and we've seen purges. And we're going to talk about what those are on the next slide. But as I said, when a vote is changed or tampered with, the unique identifier changes, and that allows us to flag it and look at it. So through Wednesday, we had seen 57,000 votes that were altered during early voting. Now, in some cases, altered means purged. In some cases, it means purged and reinstated a couple of days later. In some cases, it's cast by one person, and yet it's voted by another. We saw 10 blocks of Westminster Street in Highland Park, and they had every single one of their votes purged and later, but partially reloaded. We see people who are double voting. We see people with no voter ID voting. How does that happen? In Houston alone, we saw 250,000 votes altered on October 14th. Now, what I'm saying is we're just generating this from the records that the county is publishing. So let's talk about what ghosts, phantoms, and purged or tampered are. Ghosts are people that use another person's residence as their legal permanent address for voting purposes, but no one at that residence has ever heard of that person. This happens to be 4. In fact, this poor family ended up with another one. They ended up with 5 ghosts in their house, all of whom are living overseas, and all of whom voted twice. So we saw these ghosts, and we're going to show you a site you can go to if you want in Dallas or Houston. We haven't loaded the other voter records, but we may be doing that in other places. But you'll be able to go to this site, particularly if you live in Dallas or Houston, plug in your street address and find out who else is living at your house that you've never seen or met, but voting from it. There are phantoms. Phantoms are people that check in on the poll books as one person, but their vote shows up as someone else. That's how you see all these people in Dallas and Houston that have gone in to vote, and we're getting these affidavits all the time. They've gone in to vote and been told they've already voted, but they haven't. One poor man raised such a ruckus. Eventually, they got in touch with Dallas Central County, and Dallas Central County said, "Oh, well, it's his wife that's voted." And he says, "Oh, well, that's wonderful news. She's been dead 5 years. I'm looking forward to seeing her again." Purged or tampered votes. These are voting records that the county posts as having been voted, and then later we see the county purge them or otherwise change them or tamper with them. And as I said, we have 57,000 instances of that, and about 250,000 of those in Houston. So some days the numbers are so big it can only be done by the computer. A computer can't, individual people can't change 250,000 or even 40,000 votes in a day. That has to be a computer program. But on a lot of days we see just 100 votes here or 200 votes there, and that could actually be the local operator playing in the game. Because as I said, in all this software, the local operator can actually go in and add or subtract or change votes. So, election fraud or voter fraud right now? Well, it's clearly one or the other. Many of you may have already seen this. This is Michigan, and in the dead of night in Michigan, Michigan suddenly quit counting votes for 3 hours. And when they started counting votes again, suddenly 138,339 new ballots had been found. Now, that's 2.9% of all the turnout. All of them, by the way, unattested. And they show up, and every single one of them is for Biden. So notice, Trump had 2,200,902. In this update, 2,200,902. Biden had 1,992,356, and over here he has 2,130,695. That's the additional vote. Every single new vote is given to Biden. Jorgensen doesn't get any, Hawkins doesn't get any, Blankenship doesn't get any. This is a problem. Now, what's been learned since then is that it's being called a data input error from one particular county. But it's not an input error unless the local operator is adding votes. So, is this America or Venezuela we're living through right now? And it's a very interesting question. Essentially, 5 key battleground states with Democrat governors all suddenly quit counting at the same time in the dead of night, and then they suddenly resumed 3 hours later. Trump was comfortably ahead in all 5 of them when they stopped. When counting resumed 3 hours later, enough new ballots had been found in all 5 states, 5 out of 5, that suddenly Biden is caught up. Even more incredibly, virtually every single found ballot in most of the states was for Biden. And unsurprisingly, in Michigan, it's now known that the votes were a bogus file upload. So, and one state, Wisconsin, now has more votes than their entire registered voters. Nationally, that turnout was 50 to 60%, which is huge, but 100+% is really huge. What can you do?
Definitely.
Well, the first thing is quit buying this thing that it's not connected to the internet and it's air gapped and it's safe. It's absolutely not. We can prove it a dozen ways. Your Secretary of States are issuing waivers to these private companies to do things that in most cases contravene your state law, and yet they're doing it. Don't let them do it. Make sure you don't have ghost voters at your house and demand that your state clean its voter rolls. In the case here of Houston and Dallas, openrecords.org, you can go to their website, plug in your street address, and you'll see whether there are any ghosts living in your house. Other states ought to be trying to do the same thing. And by the way, what you're seeing on this Open Records website is not something they generated. You are seeing the county's records that are there. One of the things we've been recommending to people is, look, vote on election day to throw off the forecast. Remember, early voting, there's a gap between the end of early voting and election day. And that gives people a lot of time to figure out how many votes they need to move around, jigger, or change. And of course, that's what we saw in a mini form Tuesday night when all 5 Democrat states suddenly quit counting and took a 3-hour hiatus to figure out how many votes needed to appear or get changed. In this case, they appeared, and sure enough, they did. Volunteer to be a judge, clerk, or poll watcher. Even though everything we are talking about right now is in the computer, the fact of the matter is, being a poll watcher, noting anything that looks weird, and then doing an affidavit. If you don't do an affidavit, you're wasting my time and anybody looking at this. Do an affidavit. You'd be surprised how many times they get to be important. In your area, find a forensic database analyst and use the county records, as is being done here, to see how many votes are being tampered with and changed in real time. Use lawsuits, sue these people. And one thing about it is that'll draw media attention and it will educate the public and it'll stir action, because we can never have another election as shamelessly rigged as this one has been by people who are trying to change the results of the election. We like the idea of going back to real paper ballots. By the way, if you go in and check in a poll book and they print your ballot for you, and then you go and vote it on a tablet and then insert it somewhere else, that's a ballot marking device, and that is not really a paper ballot. We have identified at least 10 ways to change your vote on that ballot, even though it looks like you have voted the way you wanted to. We need, as a people, to require real safety certification standards for software. There was at one time a plan to do what was called EAC 2.0. That's Elections Administrative Code 2.0. It was supposed to start talking about what standards would be required for security in the voting system. It was never done. And if we get those standards, then we either need to have the DHS or a third party do what's called a penetration test to make sure that it meets those security standards. You just ignore CIS's proclamations because they're still saying they don't even know that it's connected to the internet. If you do have true paper ballots, not those that are done by ballot marking devices, require spot risk limiting audits to take a few of the ballots and make sure that the final vote seemed to be somewhere in line with that. And finally, I think we need to think about a national blockchain-based voting system. I do not want the federal government running my elections, but I wouldn't mind the federal government mandating that all election systems be blockchain-based if a federal election is involved, because it is part of our national critical infrastructure. As a democracy, we rise and fall on believing that our vote is sacrosanct, is protected, and is going to be voted as we pulled the lever for it to be voted. And that's simply not the case now.
So, Russ, that's amazing. Tell us about your attempts to get this to appropriate authorities over the last year.
Well, we made a lot of attempts. We've been able to get some attention from certain congressmen who are extremely concerned. We did have one congressman who was defeated, Pete Sessions. He knew his race had been rigged. We were able to show him and prove to him, and he filed a real live complaint. And I give credit to him for that. He has now gotten reelected. I think that he will be a strong warrior to start doing something about cleaning up this mess. We have tried to get the Cyber Intelligence Security Administration in Washington to listen. They're the people inside DHS who are supposed to be keeping us safe. They would not take a briefing. They were willing to have a very short few-minute phone call, and that was it, with no follow-up whatsoever.
Wonder why?
Yeah, we've been to the FBI twice. The FBI has no interest in looking at this. So we've made a number of efforts. Now, we have found some people in the DHS at the field level who took a lot of our data. They came and spent a full day with us. And they took a lot of our data and they put it out to 3 of their own private contractors that they use on cyber operations. And every one of those contractors came back and went, oh my gosh, this is right, the data is right, this is horrible. They have been unable to accelerate that up the chain of supervisors. So they're getting resistance from above. We have had one DOJ prosecutor who was involved in their cyber commission and is pretty darn technical. And that prosecutor looked at this and went, this isn't evidence, this is proof. And that person helped us submit it to the FBI the first time, and the FBI did nothing. We then went in July of 19 and tried to get the FBI to look at this. But I will tell you, the FBI either is not interested, thinks it's a political hot potato, may not have people who are qualified to even be looking at this. We personally know of an instance where there was a child pornography problem, and the FBI was given a laptop, and when they fired it up to look at it, they had it connected to the internet. That's crazy. You never do that.
Yeah.
Connected to the internet, and it immediately defragged and got rid of all of the evidence. So, is it?
Maybe that was on purpose.
Yeah, is it purposeful? I don't know. Is it incompetent? I don't know. But the FBI is doing nothing about this. We tried to take it to our own Attorney General here in Texas, and the Attorney General's office didn't want to do anything. I mean, some of them did, but in effect, they said, well, elections here are under the Secretary of State, and we're just the Secretary of State's lawyer, and we can't really pursue any of this fraud or even look at it without the Secretary of State asking us to. And of course, the Secretary of State has been very unresponsive in really looking at these problems. Our top leadership in the state, Greg Abbott and Dan Patrick, they have not even been willing to come and take the briefing that you have seen today. And by the way, what you've seen today is just the tiniest bit of all of the proof and evidence that we have amassed and put together in this 2-year investigation.
Well, what could people do to get their law enforcement or local officials aware of this, besides
there's a number of things. There are going to be some lawsuits filed here. There are going to be some reporters here that are wanting to pick up on this story. We've already been in talks with about 2 or 3 of them, and they are very interested in doing something. At some point or another, between lawsuits and just reporting, like this and others, the federal government is going to have to act, and the states are going to have to act, and they're not going to get to pretend like the emperor really does have beautiful new clothes. They're going to have to admit he's naked, and they're going to have to bring in some people who are serious about really securing our elections.
Right. Well, thank you much for your time, Russ. We'll get this up the flagpole to the right people. So I appreciate your time, and maybe we'll have you back on down the road to try to talk about how this is developed.
Great. Todd, I appreciate it so much, and just let us know how we can help.
Okay.
Yan, so, I don't know kung fascinated kayo as much as fascinated ako sa nangyari. Dahil it's very interesting, no? May mga dayaan, di bago sa atin yan sa Pilipinas, dito sa Amerika. Ngayon lang parang sumabog na napakalaki. So, malalaman natin ngayon kung ano ang paano gumulong yung hustisya rito. At malalaman rin natin kung ano ang mga political maneuvering sa mga darating na araw, kung saan papunta ito, kung aabot ba ito talaga sa korte, sino ang paano na ipipresent. So anyway, ang importante sa atin is hopefully makarating dun sa Pilipinas at nang makita nila, no, malaman nila, maintindihan nila. Although kung sakaling aakyat sa korte ito at balasahin doon, siguradong malalaman ng buong mundo. Ang tanungan niyan is, mangyayari kaya? Kailan kaya mangyayari? Kung mangyayari. Okay? So, tayo nasa labas tayo nanonood. Nakikita natin kung ano ang flow ng pangyayari ngayon. So, witness tayo. So, hopefully, hindi ma-flag ito. Hopefully, hindi ma-censor yung mga impormasyon na ilalagay natin, ipuput out natin sa YouTube. Marami pa ho tayong mga impormasyon. So, sana ho, tangkilikin natin itong ating YouTube channel at nang ma-inspire naman tayong maglagay ng additional na impormasyon. Share nyo ho at yung like button at mag-comment ho kayo. Yung comment na mapag-usapan naman natin. Huwag yung comment na pag-aawayan. Okay, so yun lang naman Nasa labas tayo, tinitingnan natin yung mga pangyayari, pinag-uusapan natin at inaalam natin kung magmula sa pagkakita natin ng mga ebidensya at kung anong magiging resulta, magiging reaction. Okay, so sana natapos ninyo at may mga nakuha tayong mga valuable information kahit man hindi natin magamit direkta sa atin, kahit papano may share natin, may kalat natin yung impormasyon makarating doon sa Pilipinas sa mga opisyal natin at nang makita nila kung sinong dapat nilang kakausapin, ano dapat ang titingnan nila para maprotektahan ang integridad ng eleksyon kung gagamitin pa ulit nila itong software na ito o halimbawa ibang software. Dahil di naman maiiwasan yan na magiging digital talaga yung approach ng electronic talagang approach ng election. So sa ayaw natin sa hindi gusto talagang mapupunta doon dahil efficiency yun kaya lang experience like this maintindihan kung paano i-prevent yung mga magiging potential na problema. So hopefully ho mai-share ho natin. Kaya natin hinimay-himay ito dahil para hindi masyado mahaba. Pangalawa, para hindi ma-flag dahil na-flag na ho ito. Yung original source nito medyo hindi ma-download at saka I think eventually I don't know kung isi-censor nila. Grabe ang censor ngayon. Hopefully ito hindi nila ma-flag, hindi nila ma-censor kaya Tagalog ang usapan natin dito. So yun na po, maraming salamat po sa panunod ninyo. Maraming salamat sa pagsubaybay, sa mga sumusubaybay. Hopefully, suportahan nyo ho itong channel natin at nang mainggan nyo ho tayo magbigay ng dagdag na impormasyon para sa mga kababayan natin sa lahat ng sulok ng mundo. Ako si By Joel. Kung hindi ho mabigat sa inyo, pabigat sa inyo ang pag-like at pag-share at pag-click ng bell button para ma-notify kayo sa susunod na mag-upload tayo ng video. Maraming salamat ho. Mag-ingat ho kayong lahat.